Okay, so let's start off with lab. This week is going to be kind of weird because we had last Saturday off. So the Saturday lab people have to catch up. So Saturday lab people will come tomorrow and do dry lab 2. Friday lab people, we're going to have a review today, and Saturday lab people are more than welcome to come if they like. Basically, I've got another just review problems and worksheets. Just it's not required, Friday people or Saturday people, but I had to figure out a schedule to catch up to Saturday people. And then and next week is your first wet lab. Now your first wet lab requires a write-up. I'm going to go over that in detail. A couple of people I talked to last week a little bit about it, and so anyway, I'm going to go over that in detail today. So you need to pick up your lab coat, your goggles, a bound comp like book. If it has a grid in it, graph paper in it, all the better, because you'll be doing graphs. Oh, okay. So if you have any questions about any also closed-toed shoes, of course, today you need closed-toed shoes also. I'm just looking at everyone's shoes. Everyone looks good.
It's been over my glasses, and I am obsessed. I did not think it was this clear.
Yeah, you're lucky because you have pretty good sized glasses. So, because mine barely fit over mine, and my glasses are smaller than yours. There's a trick, though. There's a trick. There's a trick. If they don't fit right, you can put them on. You put the glasses inside your goggles before you put them on. Yeah, exactly. All right. So, any questions about the lab? Kind of confusing because we have a weekend class, and that all the holidays are always on weekends. So, yeah. The lab schedules, I have it with me actually. This is what the lab schedule says. 9/8 lecture lab review. And that's what I meant by just going to review. If you have no problems in this class whatsoever, like the work we've been doing, you're up to speed, you're very comfortable with it. That's all we're going to be doing in lab today. So it's optional whether you want to come or not. If you're struggling though, today would be a good day to attend lab, even if you're a Saturday lab person that wants to catch up. The only problem with this schedule, it says, remember I sent out that message, it says we're not doing quizzes, we're just doing tests. So the 3 quizzes I've kind of put into exam 1. So I need to slightly revise this a little bit. So we're gonna have 2 midterms plus the final. And the final is going to be partially cumulative, partially midterm number 3. It's going to be all in one. Otherwise, I'd have to give you 2 tests, midterm 3, and then a day later, give you the final, which is, it doesn't make sense. We're just going to put it all in one test. All right. Anything else? All right. Let's talk about lab write-up. Now I'm going to save this lab write-out as a separate video from the rest of the what I'm going to talk about today. Okay, so basically, this is your first wet lab here on density. there's no procedure in here for how to write up the lab. It's just so you're going to be having it's a very simple lab. It's just going to get you introduced to lab procedures, glassware. You're going to have an inventory of your little you're not going to be in a drawer. I'm going to bring this giant card in, and you're going to have a tote in there. The top 12 are for Friday, the bottom 12 are for Saturday, folks. And then you use that, put it back, and I push the cart back. It's a big giant thing that's awkward as heck, but I got stuck doing that last semester, and we don't have enough drawers to go around. Okay, so this is what the lab looks like. If you haven't looked at the lab, this is basically what it is. Density is mass over volume. It's a very important concept because it's very, very specific based on the material. For example, during the gold rush up at Sutter, miners would bring in this yellow, shiny stuff. There's a handout right there. There's a handout right there, right in front of you. Yeah, and there's 2 pages. The miners were bringing this real shiny stuff. Now, don't forget, the gold up there was unreal. It was discovered, a guy was walking along in this stream and found a piece of gold this big. This big. So there are 2 kinds of yellow, shiny things up there. One's called fool's gold, the other is real gold. Anyone know the difference? Right, and what's the difference between iron pyrite and gold? Density. Density. So the assayer, there are 2 pages there. Make sure you get to it. So the assayer would actually calculate the density on whatever the miner brought in. And if it was fool's gold, iron pyrite, they would get nothing for it. If it was gold, they would weigh it and give them cash. So density is very, very important in the physical world. If you're in geology, if you're in environmental science, if you're in biology, chemistry, density is extremely important. Most things, like 99.999%, have different densities. There's 2 kinds of densities. There's a specific density and general density, and they're slightly calculated differently. All right, so that's what the lab is about. You're going to be finding the density of various objects, liquid and solid both. Gas also has a density. For example, when I was in the Air Force, every time a plane landed and parked, we had to ground it. Because if we didn't ground it, a static charge could build up in the plane, and kerosene, jet fuel, is heavier than air. So you open a deal of jet fuel, whether you're refueling it or not, and the kerosene vapors will fall to the ground, and they'll lie on the ground. And of course, if there's a spark, away we go. So the planes had to be grounded so there was no static buildup. So gases have density, liquids have density, solids have density. Even the 4th phase plasma also has density. All right, so anyway, this is your lab. Now, when you write, one of the requirements of the pre-lab is to do a data table. So the key words on a data table are record, observe. And a data table is a place to organize your data that you've observed and recorded. Notice there's no data table there. So you have to create one. Now, there are 2 kinds of questions on here besides calculations. One is pre-lab questions. That's part of the pre-lab write-up, not the whole thing. A lot of people mistake, if they do the pre-lab questions, they think they've done the pre-lab. That's only part of the pre-lab. So sometimes there are pre-lab questions, sometimes there are no pre-lab questions. So if they're there, do them. If not, don't worry about it. I'm going to give you some examples too in a minute here. you have to go through the pre-lab questions. Every lab, all labs except dry labs, require you to write a conclusion. Conclusions worth a third of the points of the lab. So if the lab is worth 15 points, how many points is the lab worth? 5, right? Because 5 times 3 is 15. All right. So remember that. It doesn't say write a conclusion. Some labs do, but most labs in this class do not. Like 1A labs, they always say write a conclusion. There's another way they say it too. I forgot what the verbiage they use for writing a conclusion. Same thing though. Okay. So let me show you. Now the pre-lab is due at the beginning of lab. You have to show me your lab book and I will initial it. Now, say you didn't do that. Say you didn't do that. I have the option of sending you home for safety reasons, or I can allow you to do the lab. Now, lab one, not lab one, the first lab we do, that's a wet lab, you can fix all your mistakes. So if the lab's worth 15 points and you messed up and only got 5 on it, you can make it 15. From then on, you get what you get. Okay. Now, if you don't come with your lab attire, sometimes I have spares around, sometimes I don't. If I have some around, I can loan them to you. That's not a problem. If I don't have any to loan though, you've got to do, you can't be in lab. I mean, it's a very strict department policy, as well as the, called the university, the college's policy as well. Big deal. Okay, so think of the pre-lab as a ticket to be able to do the lab. Now you have 2 options. Some of you have a tablet you can write on. Now you can do that if you like, but you have to be able to write on it with a stylus, and you have to hand write it out, just like you're on paper. So if you like to do that, that's fine. If you're going to use paper, what you do when you finish the lab, you're going to scan it and then upload it. If it's a tablet, you're going to save it out as a PDF file. Always PDF. One PDF file, not a PDF per page. I want a PDF of the whole thing. Now you can use your phone. If you're on a tablet, you can scan it, save it out as a PDF file. A lot of ways to do it. Okay. All right. So this one about thread-bound notebook, you can also do the tablet like I was telling you. No spiral bound, no binders. Now, when you get in both 2A and 1A, you're gonna have to do it this way. So I'm just getting you prepped for your next class. All right, depending on how much money you pay for your lab book, it may come pre-numbered or may not. You can also get it leather bound. I've been doing this for like 15 years. And some students have bought a leather bound lab book. I'm sure their parents bought the leather bound for them. Versus $1.50 at Walmart. All right. So if the pages aren't numbered, number them. On the right page only, you're not writing on the left side. And the reason for that is, I'll show you some examples when people write on both sides, is the paper nowadays is really thin. And depending on what kind of pen you're using, sometimes it'll bleed through. And it gets real, and then when you scan it, it gets even uglier. So one side only, you have plenty of room in your comp book. Okay, indelible ink. Who knows what indelible means? Is a pencil indelible? No, because you can erase it. Ink can be erasable if you buy an erasable ink pen. Blue or black? Blue or black? Another weird thing that most people find weird is No whiteout, no scribbling of mistakes. One line through it. I want to be able to read your mistake. Now, this is very common when you're in a science lab, engineering, geology, biology, whatever. When you submit that stuff, it's everything. And it used to be any blank space you'd have to fill in with lines. So the whole page was covered in ink. And it ends up being very, very busy. Okay, so as far as the pre-lab write-up, you need title of the lab, purpose for doing the lab, and frequently it'll say purpose in the document for your lab packet. Excuse me. And you have to have first aid for each chemical you're using that's not water or something edible. Now, the first lab, we're doing water. So there's no first aid needed. There's something called a SDS document. Any manufacturer that makes a chemical is required by international law to produce an SDS document about that chemical. In that document, there are like 16 sections. Section 4 is first aid. Section 11 is toxicity. So if you are pregnant, trying to become pregnant, or breastfeeding, or you're a guy trying to become your partner becoming pregnant, same thing holds. Sperm are just as susceptible as ovums. Okay, so you go to section 11, and I'll tell you whether it's a teratogen. What's a teratogen? Anyone know? Causes birth defects. Yeah, carcinogens causes cancer. That section will tell you whether it is or not. Now, we have very safe labs. They would not allow us to have a lab with carcinogens. Up in Washington at Tacoma Community College and Olympia Community College and a whole bunch of Olympia colleges up Green River Community, they all had a carcinogen. It was to determine the percent caffeine in coffee. And they extracted the caffeine out with methylene chloride, which is a carcinogen. And OSHA has a very strict regulation on that. So what they did is they did it in the hood and they did a lot of safety stuff, but was still, and to make matters worse, the first time a manufacturer made decaf coffee, that's the way they did it. They used methylene chloride. Now they do it differently. They do a steam distillation. It still doesn't remove all the caffeine, but they do it much safer now than they did before.
What disease does it give people now?
It's still got like, I think, 0.5% caffeine in it. It's not zero. All right, anyway, so the first lab that we have to do this on, I'll give you a heads up on. Let me show you how to do it. Let me see here. So I'm in a search engine. I'm using Google SDS space. Let's do copper sulfate. Again, any manufacturer will publish a PDF of their SDS. I don't know. Let's just choose this one. Okay. Now you might get an old one that says MSDS. Okay, instead of safety data sheet, it's called material safety data sheet. I don't know why they changed it, but the older ones are MSDS. Okay, I'm going to go to section 4. Oops. And there is the first aid. So all SDSs, section 4 is first aid. They've really standardized it. And there are a whole bunch of other parts to this. There's the CAS number, how to storage, hazards, flammability issues, whole bunch of stuff. That's all you need to do to find what the first aid is. Okay, so let's jump back over to. Okay, so you're going to handwrite this procedure and stuff. Now, I don't know about you, but when I do a lot of handwriting, my arm hurts. And I do a lot of guitar stuff, do a lot of piano stuff, so my fingers are well toned. My arm still hurts. So just do a little at a time. Don't do it the night before. All right. Sometimes there's a data table in your write-up, sometimes there isn't. If there isn't one, just create your own, and you can modify it during the lab. If you need to add something or something like that, that's fine. I just want you to have a start on the data table. All right, then you'll have post-lab questions and conclusions on your write-up. Now I'll grade your previous week's lab during lab. I'll just go to under Canvas as an instructor. There's a way to grade your stuff you've submitted. Okay. Remember, I'm going to save this as a separate file. All right. When you do a graph, students love to do tiny graphs. I don't know why. Ever since I've been teaching, they all do graphs this big. I don't want a graph this big. I want a big graph. All graphs have to have a title at the top, and it's real easy to do a title. All you need to do is reflect the title of the axes. What are the axes? Then you go mass versus volume. One axis is the mass, the other axis is the volume. So that's the title of the graph. Each axis, make sure you have it titled as well. Like for the mass, is the mass in pounds, grams, kilograms, nanograms, have units along with it. Scaled correctly. Now, you can have a whole page graph, but the graph is effectively this big if you scale it wrong. So to scale it, you go, what's the smallest value? What's the largest value? And that's where your top and bottom of your pages are, and left and right. So you'll end up with a nice big graph. You need a legend if you're graphing more than one set of data. That's just a box saying, you know, the red dots are, the green dots are, whatever. Now, this is a part a lot of students find weird. You don't connect the dots because you are measuring something with some inherent error in it. So you don't connect the dots. You take your pencil and you draw a smooth line through it. And when you're comfortable with the smooth line through the data, then you put a ink through it. Okay, so that's for a graph. And these are very standard class to class. Okay, so let me give you some examples. I notice there are two signatures up there. One is for your pre-lab, the other is for lab cleanup. Your area needs to be clean. The lab benches, if you remember, are black and they're shiny. When you leave, they need to be shining. Now, your first wet lab, you're just using water. So lab cleanup should be extremely easy. But anyway, that's what and so before you go though, make sure I sign off on your lab for cleanup. So the way it does, when you come in the lab for wet lab, I'll introduce it. I'll show you the setup typically. And then I'll let you start. And then I'll walk around and check for pre-lab. Okay, so title, purpose, procedure. Now in the procedure, it is like a recipe. So if you want to summarize it over your packet, lab packet, that's fine. But you got to have enough details so you can follow it. Okay, or you can copy it word for word, whatever you want. Now this slide happened to be worth 20, depends on which way the wind was blowing when I did the syllabus. 15 or 20 typically points, sometimes 10. It doesn't matter though. Now a lot of these people put their name on it. In those days, this is, 2010, this is 14, 13 years ago. We weren't using Canvas, so they couldn't scan and upload it. Now, you don't have to put the name on it because when you scan it, it's automatically under your name. So you can put your name on it if you want, but it is not necessary. Pre-lab, cleanup, signature, title, purpose. In this case, they had, we're using hydrochloric acid. They had to go to their SDS and get the first aid for hydrochloric acid. Data table. Couple things. Numbers in science have units. Very few numbers don't. For example, grams per milliliter for density. pH is one of the few numbers that doesn't have units. And we're not going to be working with pH, and I'm going to talk about pH, but we're not going to be using it in the lab. But anytime you have a number, make sure there's a unit by it. You can do that one of two ways. You can put temperature and you put degree C up here, or you can put a degree C for every number. It doesn't matter. I just need to know, what do these numbers mean? Over here, 32 seconds was an error. So there was a nice line written through it that I can still read it. 30 should have been 34 seconds. Remember to put a 0 before the decimal point if the number is less than 1. You need to have material. So on next week on your density lab, you're going to have a balance for weighing things. You're going to have beakers. You're going to have a burette, pipette, a ruler. Those are your materials. Here's another data table. Okay. I just have a lot of examples here. Now here is post-lab questions. Thank you. That was very nice. Okay. So the pre-lab is easy points. The pain to do, but it's easy points. And remember, don't waste easy points because test points are hard points. Okay, so any questions about that? I'll save this out as a separate video. I'll put it under modules lab related. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you just have it's a place for your data. Yeah, and obviously you can't fill it in because you haven't done the lab yet. So, and it's not a disaster. If you don't have a data table done, I'm not going to send you home. But it's just handy if you've already got it done. All right, any other questions? Yeah, every lab that doesn't use, if it's just using water, like the lab 3, the first lab uses water, and the next lab, percent composition lab, the next lab, you don't have to put it in there either. But the lab after that, you have to put it in. I'll warn you. Say, everyone, make sure you do your SDFs. Yeah. I do. I'm going to put, it's not the same as this one. I'm going to put this one on along with the video for this. I mean, once you do one, it's not very hard. In fact, the lab write-up in your lab packet, just you almost follow that the way it's laid out. And that's so, except for conclusions. Most in Chem A labs don't say write a conclusion. But every class you take, you're going to want to write a conclusion. So I'll get used to doing it.